Hello, my name is Jerry LeFave, and today we'll be talking about Volkswagen's emission scandal. So, what's the context? What happened and who was involved? CEO Martin Winterkorn's had a goal of world domination for Volkswagen in a sense where he really wanted to capture the markets of the world, and focusing on North America, he really saw diesel cars as the solution to that. However, his diesel cars did face a problem when regulations in the United States have really strict rules on emissions. And when these diesel cars were being pushed through emission testing, they were failing. And instead of going back and re-engineering the car, Winterkorn instead pushed for his engineers to come out with another roundabout way to get around the emissions testing and get past it without having to spend a lot of money on changing the cars themselves. And fearing for their jobs, they came up with a few lines of code that would essentially deceive the emission testing and produce results that would prove for the cars to be acceptable on the road, when in reality they weren't. So how did it go wrong? Volkswagen failed themselves and its stakeholders because of the toxic and fear-based company culture, executive disconnect, and lack of industry accountability, which heavily influenced the company's trajectory towards reaching its goal of world domination. This idea of toxic company culture really set up the company for failure from the get-go. Having this idea that you're not going to have a job if you don't do it properly this first time, or every single time, if you don't do it up to perfection, you might not have a job, really does not allow for employees to professionally grow. And as a result, if employees can't grow, then the company's not going to grow, and it's not going to benefit from the work that's being produced from it. However, the idea that the engineers must come up with a solution or they are fired really kind of shows the push that the company had to really get the results they wanted. I mean, as a former employee was stated saying, that's behind the push to be number one in the world. They'll look the other way about anything. This kind of idea that getting around about ways or pushing the rules is not acceptable, in a sense that if you want to be a successful company, if you want to have successful leadership, you should be really pushing your employees to do the right thing. You should really push them to do it the right way so that they can replicate it down the line and be more successful down the line. But instead, having this kind of toxic and fear-based company culture sets up Volkswagen for failure by encouraging the worst out of their employees. Next is the executive disconnect. As I previously just mentioned, CEO Winterkorn and other executives wouldn't accept failure and encourage rule pushing. That's just one example of the disconnect between the executives and the employees, understanding that, or having no understanding really, that failure is acceptable, and instead they demand the results that they envision in their head. And this disconnect between seeing the results and how to get to those results is just really present in all the operations and communications between executives and those making the decisions to get these products ready by the time that they're supposed to be. As the investigation showed, when looking into the emissions scandal, there was a lot of lack of communication between executives and the ground floor individuals, and employees or executives' names were largely kept out of the communications or emails about pushing for these roundabout ways that really push the rules and regulations within the United States. CEO Winterkorn's belief that anything could happen in the timestamp that he makes just shows his own disconnect and his own confidence of how his way goes and is the only way to go, because that's how they're going to be successful. If there's that kind of disconnect, then there's really no progress being made. And even on the board, they were talked about how they were really there for show, and they lacked the ability to ask any deep technical questions. And this lack of knowledge and this lack of in the know just exemplifies the disconnect between the executives and the employees even more. As with this kind of disconnect, if they don't understand the questions to ask, how are they going to improve their company, and how is the company going to take the step forward into world domination? And then finally, lack of industry accountability. There's a large history in the industry of pushing rules or finding roundabout ways and getting the cheapest option pushed through, as very poor precedents have been set across the board. I mean, even in Winterkorn's connection to Audi's emission issues back in 2006 is a example of just how bad the industry is with pushing rules. Even in 1978, with Volkswagen's own issues popping up for the first time and trying to get around regulations, there's just this kind of idea that it's acceptable within the industry to kind of situate your companies in a way so that they would be not exactly going about things in the most ethical or right way. And instead, they would be pushing for their employees to do something that's not exactly what other industries would deem acceptable. But in the automobile industry, it has become very evident that in various different companies, this is kind of the expectation for how to move things along. So what can be done? What are the short-term recommendations that could be made to really kind of tackle the issues that I just talked about? And some important things I would talk about would be improve internal communications, training workshops at all levels, and crisis control. Improving internal communications would be crucial to not only improving the executive disconnect, but also start to really approach the idea of the toxic and fear-based company culture. As you improve communications, there's more of an outline of what employees are expected to do, more understanding of like how they're supposed to go about reaching these kind of expectations that leadership has situated. But it also puts people into positions of accountability. It shows the hierarchy or the chain of command that operations are decided upon, who they're being placed upon to really start the work, and then the results are then can be tied back to those individuals and can be used to progress the individuals forward. Instead of having to worry about your job every week and trying to figure out if like this will be acceptable by the leader's perspective, maybe this time around it's important to understand their own values, and that kind of falls into place with the training and workshops at all levels. Understanding where one's values and ethics fall in the workplace is crucial. And in the previous disconnection between the executives and the employees, it's obvious that there was no discussion about what's acceptable and where an individual falls in the play in the big picture. Understanding your values and you can be proud of your work going into your work is important because people will really follow that idea that their work means something and that there's something coming out of it. And then finally, crisis control. As we talk about here in our master's program, crisis communication is key in situating your organization to be able to move past what has happened. And despite Volkswagen having a lot of leadership changes and financial setbacks, the Volkswagen really has to respond and show that they're still trying to move forward. They're still that company that is trying to recapture their customers' faith, and they have to move forward. They can't just be stuck and say, yeah, we got caught and we don't know what to do. It's really time for them to start to push forward, even though it just happened. And then on the long term, the most crucial recommendation I would give is for the new leadership to be a more transformative style, really tackling on that toxic and fear-based company culture, as well as the industry's idea that leadership can be like an iron fist and don't have to really worry about the repercussions can change. A new transformative leader can really bring a new change to Volkswagen and show its customers and old and new employees that they mean business into getting on the right track. They can change up the infrastructure of the company and they can show production and improvement among the employees and their products, so that in the long run, the company can slowly rebuild itself to be at the top or at the pinnacle that it once saw. And finally, transparency. Transparency can go a long way in any industry, but most importantly with Volkswagen, transparency among communication between employees and even the public in the company could go a long way, as people don't trust it. The employees won't trust leadership 100% until they start seeing results. They have to be able to observe the change. Without observing the change, then there won't really be any tangible change that occurs on the ground level and even at the broader leadership perspective as well. Thank you.